get us 55% of the way into meeting the targets. But we really also need to look not just at how we power the system, so the energy side, but also how we run the system, so how we produce and how we consume. We still need to meet for human needs, but we need to think about moving from a linear system where we take, make, and waste to a circular system, which is built on 3 core principles. The first is in the design choices, the business model choices, the policy choices. How can we incentivize waste and pollution being designed out? So eliminate waste and pollution. The second is how do we keep the materials that we have in use in ongoing use, in circulation. So how do we circulate? And that's everything from the everyday products that we have in our households, to the actual buildings that we live in, to the vehicles that we're in, even thinking about the food, designing out food waste and loss, but also keeping the bio-waste going. And the third one, of course, is regenerating natural systems on which all our economy is built, on which it is thoroughly dependent, and if it is not regenerated, we're again not going to get very far in terms of the climate targets. So those are the 3 principles of the circular economy. As I said, I'm moderating, but we've got an excellent panel of speakers today. We've got a short keynote first, and then we will get to hear perspectives of activity happening in Rwanda, Saudi Arabia, Indonesia, and also perspectives of those working with workers and employment in this space as well. So, to kick us off, I'd really like to welcome Gerd Müller, who is the Director General of UNIDO, to say a short few words about how they are working with circular economy and why they see this as important in the climate transition. Gerd, I've lost you. Do you want to come to the stage?
It's on? Yes, of course. Thank you this morning, ladies and gentlemen, dear guests. It's an honor and pleasure to address all you here today. Special thanks go to the United Nations Institute for Training and Research and the 8 other United Nations and international organizations. I represent UNIDO. UNIDO is the UN Organization for Sustainable Industrial Development. We are the technical agency of the UN. We are the agency, we implement concrete solutions, ladies and gentlemen. So climate change is the single greatest threat we are facing together as one planet. Yes, that is the message from the COP27 here. 30 million people have lost homes, property or livelihoods in the floods in Pakistan. Think about this catastrophe. Drought, no rain, 4 years, 20 million people in Saharan regions have lost their livelihoods. 100 million in sub-Saharan Africa, in Latin America, in coastal regions worldwide are massively threatened. We have to think globally, take responsibility globally. The poorest of the poor are the hardest hit. Ladies and gentlemen, today half the global population faces water insecurity. That is a great challenge for the future, water insecurity. But despite all this, I'm convinced that we can overcome these challenges. I'm not a pessimist, and I'm not only for wishful thinking. I hear a lot of wishful thinking around in every side event here. Wishful thinking. Be realistic. But I'm convinced that we can overcome these challenges. UNIDO is contributing to climate action through sustainable industrial development. In our work, we see that a circular thinking connects a healthy economy with a healthy planet. By adopting circular economy practices, the world could avoid 45% of the emissions from industry. Circular economy, we could avoid 45% of the emissions from industry, agriculture, and land use. In the building sector alone, constructions, the building sector alone, circular economy actions could cut emissions up to 60%. but we need a new thinking, dematerialization, new materials. Adaptation to climate change can also be circular. In cities, we have to talk about nature-based solutions. Nature-based solutions foster the use of renewable resources and sustainable building materials. That is even a very important question for the future in African cities, in mega cities, the new mega cities of the future. This means resilient infrastructure and a healthier ecosystem in and around cities. In a few years, more than 75% of all people in the world are living in cities and around cities. Ladies and gentlemen, since 2020, UNIDO convenes global consultations on the circular economy, co-chaired by Austria and Costa Rica. We see that, thankfully, many countries are already in transition to a circular economy, but don't talk, take action. Right now, 50 African countries, Rwanda is a frontrunner, 50 African countries have policies, strategies, or legislations that contribute to a circular economy. Networks among responsible ministries and across sectors like this side event, networks are very, very necessary, and the private sector must be actively involved in these networks. Financing must be coordinated to reach small and medium enterprises. They are the drivers of innovation that we need. In short, partnership that create win-win situations. And only with this holistic approach can we find zero waste solutions for every stage of a material's life circle. Zero waste solutions. Yeah, that is an aim. That is a challenge. We are one planet. Our global challenges can only be solved with global cooperation, with global responsibility. We must act in the spirit of solidarity. Let me, in general, say at the end something to the COP27 and all what here is discussing. Climate protection for me is a question of the survival of our societies, and it's a global challenge. The consequences of climate change hit the poorest of the poor hardest. But the facts are the G20 countries, only the G20 countries emit about 80% of CO2 emissions globally. 20 countries responsible for 80%. Let's talk about their responsibility and their strategies. Industrial development and CO2 emissions can and must be decoupled. That is the key question. Is it possible to decouple economic growth that will happen the next years, even and especially in African countries, decouple economic growth and CO2 emissions? Is it possible? A sustainable industrialization create millions of jobs. Egypt, for example, needs 2 million new jobs every year for the young generation of this country. Africa needs 20 million new jobs every year for the young generation. So the big question is, how is it possible to decouple economic growth? That is very, very necessary, and that means, of course, energy, an increase of energy. How is it possible to decouple this economic growth from CO2 emission? And there we must, for this, use all technological options, all. We talk a lot about the new chances of green hydrogen production. Of course, that is the today question. The development of green hydrogen production, that is the energy for the future, but not the energy of today. And for the next 5 years, when I think about India, Bangladesh, China, Nigeria, or Rwanda, or even Germany, where I'm at home. So there are realistic technical concepts through use of carbon capture. We have to talk about this technology because 80% of the total demand of energy worldwide is fossil-based. So we need a technology for carbon capture. The high-scale expansion of renewable energies, of course, renewable energies, especially a big chance for developing countries, and the support for circular economy and proper use of resources as well as the at-scale use of nature-based solutions. The industrialized countries, the global north, has a special responsibility here. They must take on this responsibility for financing even the proper transformation process and the loss and damage process. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Is this working? You put this one back on? This one working? Okay, great. Thank you so much for those remarks, which were really wide-ranging and actually blended together the need to transition to circular economy and the energy transition. It gave us a little bit of insight into the different things people need to do. So for the business sector, it's thinking about the design choices, which materials are going to be used, how are those materials going to be put together, and how is the product going to be put on the market? Is it going to be a reuse system, a take-back system? We need to this is a really innovative space. And for that reason, I find it very exciting. Obviously, innovation and transition is difficult. If it was super easy, we would have already done it. So that's some of the stuff on that side. From a policy point of view, it is equally innovative, actually. There are some policies that exist that we can implement better. Some of that is around waste management, recycling, better sorting and collection. But actually, on the upstream side, policymakers collaborating with the rest of the economy to figure out how can policies incentivize that change in business practice. And of course, it was touched on the need for investment and the need for really big economic signals. So I'm delighted that we have representatives from the Ministry of Environment here. This is really a cross-government agenda. It is not just a small siloed piece because it is the entire economy. So on that note, I'm really delighted to welcome up the panel. We have the Minister of Environment for Rwanda, Dr. Jean d'Arc. We have Her Royal Highness Ms. Marshall. We have, give me one second, we have Dr. Medrilzam, the Director of Environmental Affairs within the Ministry of Development Planning from Indonesia. We have Mr. Zihan from the YOUNGO Cities and Green Jobs Working Group's representative, and Robert Marinkovic, Advisor for Climate Change at the International Organization of Employers. So we should get a good breadth of experience and examples. Do come to the stage, please. Do you want to move down one? That'd be perfect, great. Okay. I wish we were in a semicircle. It would be slightly easier to see you all. But I want to kick off with just painting a very initial picture of the situation in Rwanda, if I may. So from Rwanda's experience, as was mentioned, one of the front-running countries on this agenda, you're going to be hosting the World Circular Economy Forum very soon. Can you give us a bit of insight into the main opportunities you see for Rwanda, but also the main barriers? What is it that you're really seeking to overcome at the moment in terms of, in order to do more on the circular economy transition?
Thank you very much. Good morning, colleagues, all protocol observed. First of all, before even going into policies and programs that we are having in Rwanda, I want to tell you that circularity is already something Rwandans have in their culture. Let me give you an example. When we used to be small, our parents, grandparents used to buy containers of honey, containers of bread, butter, but they never throw those empty containers. They used to wash them and keep sugar in the container that you use to have honey. They use those containers to keep food in the fridge. They use those containers to keep dried fruits for further use. I have a very interesting example. When we were small, our parents used to stitch dress for us, but they made sure they make big size so that we will grow into those big size dresses. Maybe some of you had the same experience. So my parents used to tell me that as you are growing faster, we will give you a dress that is 2 sizes more, so that you will not wear it 1 year, but 2 years. So if you will grow faster, you will give your dress to your younger ones. Because when we used to wear those dresses to go to school, after school, you have to change. We used to have dresses for schools and dress for home to play with. So that is circularity. That is circularity, and when we talk about cleanliness in Rwanda, it didn't come from Norway. It is in our culture. For example, when you are painting your house, what do you do with the bucket that was containing the paint? You use it to keep that dresses, so that next day you will take the bucket with old or dirty dresses to wash them in the same bucket. You understand, circularity is in our culture. So, and in Rwanda now, as we are preparing to go for circular economy, World Circular Economy Forum, we will have a lot to share with you. For more than 2 decades, Rwanda has prioritized environmental protection in everything we do, and more recently, we have been investing in the circular economy to make sure that when we are talking about waste, we make sure in Rwanda that no waste is wasted. Everything is used, reused, repaired, because it creates green jobs. For example, now we are promoting biogas. Biogas, it means even food waste is not wasted, because from biogas, you have fertilizer that you are taking to your kitchen garden, because each family should have a kitchen garden where you have bioproduct, bio-vegetables. So in 2008, we officially banned plastic bags. In 2008, now is more than 14 years we have banned plastic bags. There is no plastic bags in Rwanda, and now we have banned single-use plastics. And of course, we have made sure there are incentives for people who who embrace that policy. And it was these initiatives that opened people's eyes and mind to potential of the circular economy. However, the journey is still wrong, because sometimes you feel that you are going in a circle. So, and let me share with you the barriers we are facing: missing laws and policies, lack of circular ecosystem, because when you are banning plastic bags, for example, you have to have alternative packaging. That has opened up the eyes of our youth, women, to form cooperatives of circularity. For example, old tires of the car tires, they are used to grow vegetables in those tires. They are used to make chairs. They are used to make even slippers. And of course, still we are facing limited financing, because there are those big biogas plants that need financing. So without taking much of your time, circularity is already in our culture. That's why when you hear Rwanda being the cleanest country in Africa, it came from our culture. Rwandans, we don't eat on street, for example, because we need to be clean. We need to make sure we centralize whatever we do, to make sure that we get the basic materials, the raw materials for biogas, the raw materials for any further use. I thank you.
Great, thank you so much. And for me, one of the things you're bringing out there is that in the early examples, when you were talking about your youth, there is an inherent value attached to the dresses you were talking about, to the container jars, which is also, if it has a value, you will keep using it. You will recognize that value. And then I feel like you were going on to say, so you can find pockets of small examples, but the challenge now is to get that to scale and get that to become the mainstream default. I liked what you were saying about the banning of plastic bags is one part of the transition. It has led to other parts of the economy looking for what they can do and using resources creatively. And we definitely see that in our work at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation as well, that it's not as simple as one mechanism because it's an ecosystem. So maybe we can return to some of that. I'm going to go ladies first, although I can't see the other lady on the panel. Hello, Your Royal Highness. Could you tell us a bit about the perspective and experience from Saudi Arabia? What are the opportunities and barriers you're working with? And did I say you're the co-founder of Aeon Collective?
Thank you. Yeah, that's our nonprofit, so I'm here on behalf of Aeon Collective. Thank you for that, and please feel free to cut me off if I go too long. So I start by reiterating what a lot of our colleagues have said. I believe that that's a global challenge, one that requires clarity, inclusion, and consistency. So less of an us versus them mentality and more in terms of the work as a we, as a collective. We need to really rise up to the responsibility of tackling these complex triple threats. And that requires as well a lot of pragmatism to be added to the equation. I like to call it the art of what we could do together rather than the art or the feat of pontificating on what we should do. So the current pipelines of policies in Saudi Arabia and the way that we see it is nothing short, to the point that Honorable Dr. Jane was saying, as a return to our roots of a sustained consumption, reminding ourselves of our deep-rooted values. And again, I'll borrow another one of your lines. The road to a fully circular economy is long and challenging. Saudi Arabia aims to surpass in 15 years what took most G20 countries to achieve in 30 or 40 years. Even today, highly developed nations such as Japan, Germany, the UK, are far from being fully circular. So when we're talking about a circular economy, we have to remember what that entails. It's not only about doing recycling, it's a systems approach. And even if we've significantly stepped up recycling and reducing the landfills, that's not going to be enough. So in Saudi, we see our overarching goals and targets are mainly led by two key themes or key umbrella targets and goals. The first is net zero target by 2060. Now, to those who know us, we Bedouins favor or under-committing and over-delivering, and I'm pretty certain that with the role of civil society, we'll be able to achieve that in a much shorter timeline. And not only civil society, but the re-energization of our youth. We tend to skew very youthful, and I think having an overarching goal and target will help energize people to solve for a lot of these issues that we've unfortunately burdened them with. And I think that they see it less as a burden and more as an opportunity. That's the baseline that they know, and that's the space and the point from which they begin. So we see that as well in terms of targeting 94% waste recycled by 2035, and that's a very ambitious goal and target when you note that in Saudi we not yet separate our own garbage, and that we also have that, maybe one sees it as a value of being generous to your guests, but it's essentially an overdumping and an overuse of food. So that requires a recalibration of what we see as, let's say, not undervaluing something that's really beautiful in it, but redefining it in a way that fits our purpose. So we see it in a three-way, sort of three-pronged approach. The first is the circular economy. The second is something that's very important and valuable that requires maybe for a fossil fuel-based economy to consider, is that of the circular carbon economy. So how do we ensure the circularity from a systems perspective of carbon as well? And that requires maybe a fourth R, and I'll elaborate. You're probably familiar with what I've seen, maybe a rebranding of that from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation of the reduce, reuse, and recycle. We've added a fourth R, that's remove, because there's a lot of emissions already within our own systems, but also within the atmosphere, that if we're really serious about tackling these issues, we need to be looking at it at point source. And as well as the ecosystem regeneration efforts, because again, looking at the pieces of reducing the garbage, reducing the pressures on our biodiversity and our systems is not enough without tackling an active regeneration effort. And that requires a systems and an integrated approach, because again, we have to remind ourselves that not all positive outcomes in one area automatically leads into a positive outcome in the other. I'll give a quick example of a recent visit that we had with some colleagues to Costa Rika in the Osa Peninsula. It's very well known for its own biodiversity. And what we saw in this beautiful land were these stretches that were turned into carbon credits and what amounted to monocultural trees. And in essence, what we forget is that we're both depleting the soil's ability to capture carbon, but we're also severing very dramatically highways for certain types of monkeys to be moving from one part of the forest to the other. So we have to be mindful of who else we're sharing this planet with. And it's definitely for, an inclusive pathway for the protection of all, not only humans. So again, on the theme of turning burden into opportunity, according to the World Bank, the environmental burden on the Saudi economy is equivalent to over $23 billion in costs. And recycling, again, in terms of reframing, is seen as an ability to recontribute an annual income in the kingdom by 2035 of $32 billion. So this is not only a do-good kind of proposal, it's a do-good while you're making the right kind of income. It needs to have these kind of win-win-win situations, the biggest win obviously for the planet, but as well for the individuals that are occupying it, for the underprivileged, for people that we need to uplift and recalibrate and reskill to fulfill a lot of those roles. And the circular economy offers vast opportunities in terms of products, energies, creation and services, all of which no doubt make a major contribution to the diversification of the economy in the kingdom, away from oil and its derivative, and very much in line with our Vision 2030. Recently as well, we've been reminded of our ability maybe to disproportionately impact change outside of our borders. The PIF, which is the Public Investment Fund, yesterday has committed to net zero by 2050. Again, it's not enough to only mention the words net zero without understanding what that entails. We've been reminded of that yesterday with the high expert panel. But I think if we chart a pathway of inclusion, if we think this is not an era of transition, right? We hear energy transitions, a transition away. In a lot of ways, this is a redefinition of what those systems are, and that will create a lot of dissonance within the system. So we have to be mindful of how to calibrate for that dissonance within the system when we're making a lot of these changes. So you can think of a range of things as projects as waste to energy, the CCUS hub that will probably be announced in a few days, which will probably be the biggest in the globe, if not in the region alone. Carbon storage facilities as well. These all require the deployment of massive capitals that amount to the billions of reals. But to the point that the ED of UNIDO was making earlier, that there's also plenty of room for SMEs to play a major role, whether it's from providing support for services, such as dismantling or sorting disused electrical equipment, or also offering the broad range of consultancy services that are needed. Not enough to create supply of circular materials as well, we need to be creating the demand for those materials. So what good is it if I create really expensive green steel when there's no market for that use of the steel? We have to be working on both sides of the equation, both on the supply and the demand side. And maybe I'll end it with a few more iterations on the biodiversity side. So our colleagues at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation recently reminded us that in order for the circular economy to tackle biodiversity loss, we must not only reduce waste pollution to reduce the stress of biodiversity or the reuse and recycling of products and material to leave room for biodiversity, but we must also regenerate nature to enable biodiversity to thrive. The Kingdom has committed to protecting 20% of its land and seas. This translates not only to the sea, the beautiful sea that we share with our gracious hosts here in Egypt, the Red Sea, that is not only a good common for our region, but also has some of the most resilient coral reefs around the world. So that's something of a lot of value. And it's a public good for us to protect. And in the end, it's in the recognition that the Kingdom cannot be working on a lot of these issues alone. So on the coral reef front, we've put up a G20 platform like CORDUP to help accelerate a lot of these types of solutions, but also efforts like the Middle East Green Initiative that ensures that we're not working within this, trying to solve for these issues on our own. So this is an open invitation to all in the room to help collaborate and work on making our world a better place for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that point about collaboration is absolutely fundamental, because any system that's going to change, it might, if we're talking about very large companies, it may be a first step of simply collaboration between different departments that don't necessarily work together currently, but equally right across economies you can find the most extraordinary collaborations that emerge. I think you also touched, you brought in biodiversity, and I think it's circular economy is an approach that people have been working on, not exclusively for the emissions reductions objectives. So it also has benefits for several other of the crises, that this is a triple crisis event, so it also for biodiversity, also for generally tackling the issue of waste and pollution. But I think as you touched on, and you touched on, there's a real innovation opportunity in this as well. So, and you were talking about recycling, and there is no country in this world that will ever build enough facility to only recycle. We will need to get to solutions where the plastic bag is replaced. Maybe there's a solution that didn't even need anything in the first place. And maybe there's a solution that did need something, but it can stay in use, like, for example, the jars you talked about. So there's a lot of diversity in it. Dr. Medrilzam, we were talking briefly yesterday about your role in Malaysia in bringing the circular economy to the government's policies in the country. Could you tell us a bit about the opportunities and barriers you've experienced?
Thank you, Miranda. I'm from Indonesia, not Malaysia.
Oh God, sorry, I don't know. Sorry, my apologies.
Okay, well, just would like to return back again to 2018 when the first time I tried to introduce the term circular economy to the economic planning ministers. At that time, the terms of circular economy still not been recognized yet, and when speaking with decision makers in our country, of course they are mostly our economists, and then the way we speak should be in their own language, in the economic language. So talking about circular economy, I remember at the time that my minister just looked at me and then, what the hell are you talking about? Circular economy, what is it? So And then we try to explain, and with some struggles, and fortunately, we succeed to include the circular economy as one of our Indonesia Vision 2045. This is for 100 years of our independence. So we really would like to see that our economy is a full circular economy in 2045. That's the visions. But again, during the course, until today, certainly there are still a lot of challenges that we have to anticipate. And although now many people are talking about circular economy, however, it seems to me that the understanding of the circular economy itself is not fully grasped and understood by the whole stakeholders. Many of the even publics and even many decision makers just think that circular economy is just about waste management. I remember that someone told me that cynically stating that, well, why do you change the terms of solid waste system management to then now a circular economy? That's the understanding of many publics or many decision makers. And I said that, well, circular economy is not just about waste management. It's bigger, more than just about waste management. And I remember, again, when I speak with some economists, oh, okay, if I just talk about waste, then it won't be sold out by them. It won't be bought in. So then we have to introduce the terms of resource efficiency to decision makers. And that's much more understandable now. In terms about waste management, now we're talking about resource efficiency. Okay, then we got a kind of same understanding now. So the ball is rolling now about circular economy in my country. So, but again, to improve this understanding, we have to conduct a kind of several basic studies just to show what sort of benefits that we could gain from the circular economy in a much more macro level first. We know that many individuals, many companies are implementing the circular economy, but in terms of a macro level, in terms of decision-making process in the government, it's not there yet. So although we have a vision, but we have to prove it by studies, by even collecting some examples that proven that this circular economies actually create much more benefit. It's not just about emission reductions, it's not just about creating more jobs, but also much more technical, for examples like saving water, saving energy, and even improving the livelihood of our farmers, all those kind of things that we have to prove first, so then decision makers can get aside and get conclusions of whether we are going move forward or not. But fortunately now, in Indonesia, we have already set this circular economy to be our visions in 2045, and we have already included this circular economy as one of the priority in our first in our midterms development plan for 2020 to 2024. We during the first course of this 2020 to 2024, we tried to implement, we tried to develop the design first. How then this country will go further in a more bigger scale to implement the circular economy after 2024. So we plan to implement this circular economy in a much more faster way in for the next 5 years, started from 2025. Certainly, we have to improve the enabling conditions, because it seems that the enabling conditions still not there yet to leverage and boost the implementations of the circular economy. For example, what the incentive systems, the incentives that we have to provide, and also how then we could balance between the supply and the demands of the products from the circular economy. So there are many aspects that we have to improve, but we're still implementing this to create the enabling conditions. And at the moment, we are preparing our roadmap, and even we are also creating a new platform to meet and to gather the big player from the privates and also with the small medium enterprise. So then we really believe that there has to be a kind of collaborations between the bigger player and also smaller player. And certainly to improve the understanding, we are also working with the media now to provide a kind of rewards to the private companies that leverage and that boost the implementation of the circular economy. So there are many aspects right now that we are implementing to boost the implementation of the circular economy, but certainly collaboration is a key, as colleagues, previous speakers that have already said. And we really believe with these collaborations, of course, this can strengthen the implementation of this circular economy. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think, as you say, it's so much more than what people think it is. And there's a whole opportunity around incentivizing the use of secondary materials. You talked about the incentives that can be done through systems, through EPR schemes, but also through taxation, through a whole range of government measures. Remanufacturing, repair is also part of this. Also, all of these things that one could do ease the burden on the recycling system, because it never has to hit that system in the first place. And meanwhile, that's also where some of the mindset shift comes in and the innovation opportunities. On which point, obviously, we will need people, well, all of us actually, we're part of this and everything that we do, our skills. So I want to transition to hearing a bit of reflections from sort of the worker side. And Xuan, what are your perspectives on the openness to this transition? I mean, it's not going to happen overnight. It is a change in the economic model. So what is your perspective on, is there support for this shift? Is there excitement about the kind of opportunities and jobs and skills it would create and require?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Zahan. I'm 21 and I'm part of YOUNGO. So just to give everyone some context before I begin my intervention, we are the official children and youth constituency of the UNFCCC. And our work is, for me personally, I'm co-facilitating the cities as well as being part of the Green Jobs Working Group, where we work on issues related to urbanization and just transition in climate action. So I think a lot of speakers here have already provided very good examples about how circular economy can be an asset. But I want to take a step back because this is what young people are privileged to do, and think about why we're having this conversation. Because, to be honest, the elephant in the room with all the COP discussions is that the climate crisis that we are facing is a direct consequence of an unsustainable economic model that we are premised on. And therefore, the climate crisis and the broader environmental crisis, I suppose, is a crisis of overconsumption, it is a crisis of waste, and it is a crisis which young people are actively involved in to address. Before I highlight a little bit about what young people can do and how young people need that kind of political and societal shift to make a difference, I want to also highlight a little bit about the scale of the crisis that was alluded to just now. As a collective world, we have surpassed the 100 billion tons mark in terms of fulfilling our various needs and wants when it comes to the products and the services which we consume. At the same time, this is not a crisis that affects everyone equally. Nearly 20% of the world's population is responsible for more than 80% of the world's natural resource consumption. And young people who are on the climate front lines are facing the brunt of this overconsumption. And this is why I think when we consider what shifts young people need in adopting circular economy principles, we have to be aware of the impacts that they are facing, while at the same time considering how little they have contributed to when it comes to this crisis. Let me therefore highlight 3 political and societal shifts that I think young people need when it comes to the circular economy. First, corporate shifts. As was alluded to in the previous speeches, the circular economy creates and can facilitate the creation of green jobs in a green economy. But green jobs in a green economy cannot be fully harnessed without equipping young people with the skills and knowledge to participate in it. So this is why it is very important that we retrain and we reskill young professionals who are already in the workforce and prepare them to participate meaningfully in the green economy, and at the same time to mainstream these circular economy principles across the private sector so there is sufficient support for young people as they enter into the workforce and as they make career transitions in order to equip themselves with the skills and to be able to tap on opportunities. Second, at the level of schools and universities, a majority of young people, at least below the age of 25, are in educational institutes. But at this current time, circular economy principles and competencies are still too often lacking in educational curriculums. In many of the universities, if we are privileged enough to be in universities, the kind of training and skills that young people get are very much isolated to their discipline. And this means that, for me, for example, studying a degree unrelated to sustainability, there's very little access of young people to the kind of education that we need so that they can educate themselves on what it takes to leverage the circular economy. At the same time, we need more vocational training so that young people are able to adopt these skills which can tangibly benefit them in some of the career transitions they will make. So on the third point, on political support, on this point I want to mention that I think young people are already doing more than what they should be expected to do in making some of the everyday lifestyle choices in green economy. One specific thing about the circular economy is that many of the solutions, as the minister was mentioning, begin at the grassroots. And at the grassroots level, it is young people who are actively innovating, actively leading medium or small enterprises, actively educating others, and actively serving as ambassadors of change. And this is why we need political support to provide the right incentives for young people to continue this fight, to continue to be engaging in some of the circular economy work that they are doing, whether it is innovating solutions to save resources, whether it's coming up with new processes that will enable them to save water, energy, or other resources, or whether it is simply to communicate this to their leaders and to other stakeholders in society that this is something worth pursuing. And finally, I think there is a need for political support to engage young people meaningfully in some of these conversations. There has been a lot of talk in COP itself about integrating young people in the NDC process. Similarly, when it comes to the circular economy, because these solutions come at the grassroots level, we need political support to be able to give these young people the incentives to continue and to expand and to scale up some of their solutions to be implemented not just at a local level, but to bring it up into the subnational, into the national, and even potentially at an international level. And I think if we are able to combine the corporate shifts in the private sector, the educational shifts in schools and universities and in vocational institutes, and finally political support to be able to bring these initiatives at the grassroots up to the local, to the subnational, and to the national level, and even to the international level, young people will be able to be empowered to make some of these shifts and also to leverage the green job opportunities that are available. And finally, just to wrap up my intervention, I also want to highlight the fact that young people are not just serving as, we are not just kind of here as a representative to offer what future generations want. We are also actively contributing to some of the solutions and to contributing to some of the intergenerational collaborations that were discussed earlier today. And in this spirit, if we are taken seriously as agents of change, then we will be able to partner with some of these other stakeholders here, including governments, private sector, civil society, and other institutions to make that shift. So thank you so much, and we hope that there will be more youth engagement in the circular economy process.
Great, thank you so much for highlighting those points. And I really, really like the point around the integration into education, but not only if you're specifically focusing on this, actually to integrate the systems thinking and to give people the understanding when they study one particular area or learn about one particular area, how that is interconnected, because it's the loss of understanding of how things are interconnected that is one of the barriers here. From the employer's point of view, Robert, I want to come to you. So we've definitely highlighted the role of business in this shift. How do you see this accelerating? Where do you think we're at right now? And is it a question of more investment? Is it about R&D? Or what is going to make the change and get this to scale further?
Thanks a lot. First of all, very glad to be here. Thank you to UN Page for the opportunity. I work for the International Organization of Employers. We're a membership-based organization. Our members are national employers organizations whose members are then individual companies. We have over 150 members all over the world, and we're also one of the official constituents of the ILO, the International Labour Organization. So we work very closely with them and other UN organizations and processes. I'm pretty familiar with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and the great work they're doing on circular economy. And very interesting remarks so far. I think we've covered a lot of the key elements, definitely. I'm going to try and reflect on some of them. And in the global situation is definitely, there are some discrepancies and inequalities and large differences, like was said, between the production and the impacts. And some of the numbers that get brought up remind me of the 80-20 rule, which keeps coming up in a lot of places. 20% are always or often responsible for 80% of the effects. But also, we've heard a lot of interesting examples, right? And a lot of ways of solving this problem. So to me, one of the main messages here is that we kind of already know how to do many of these things. With climate change specifically, for a long time there's been a lot of uncertainty or a lot of complexities, how to deal with things. I feel like the circular economy, first of all, we have many good examples, we have many good avenues that we can push further and scale. Second of all, it is definitely a systems approach, and it is a cross-cutting issue, and to me it is one of the more practical ways of how we can deal with several problems that we're facing, referring to the triple planetary crisis. And second of all, the traditions and culture elements, I totally agree. I feel like in some ways we've had better circular frameworks before. Glass packaging for beverages and drinks. In many places there are some examples in actively being implemented. In Switzerland, where I'm based, we separate organic waste into green bags. You produce compost out of it. On the other hand, you have to buy bags for normal waste, which are taxed, so the price is high, so it incentivizes you to reduce your waste. But again, the point is not about waste management, and I totally agree with that. Going back to the introductory remarks, we have to be realistic. If we look at the growth and if we look at projections of growth and how much we've grown so far, we just simply cannot manage these volumes. Since 1970, for example, the resource consumption globally has tripled, and it will go further if we continue like this. According to projections, the global economy will double up until 2050. So not only do we have to figure out what to do with the current stock of everything, we have to also think about 100% more of it in the next 30 years, right? So it is definitely about reducing some of this production and finding different ways of reusing materials and resources and establishing these circular flows. To me, there's like a kind of logical sequence between three things. So for example, first of all, we talked about policies and enabling frameworks and standards. This is very important, and for the private sector specifically, standards are very important. Enabling frameworks, clear incentives, clear objectives and regulations. What are we trying to achieve, right? And first, that's kind of potentially a first step or one first key element. But then when we start implementing policies and standards and enabling frameworks, we realize often there are problems in implementation and monitoring because we don't put enough resources into monitoring and implementation. Sometimes it is a question of weak institutions. Sometimes it is a question of not perfectly or optimally developed policies, not enough collaboration or consultations. But it brings us to the implementation and the institutional element, where it is very well to implement policies and regulations and standards, but then we have to ensure and really, this is a continuous, improvement process where we keep getting better at applying these policies. Finally, how do we apply and implement better? through finance and support, capacity building, technology sharing. Like I said before, there's a lot of knowledge in the world, there's a lot of good examples, there's a lot of good initiatives. It is about connecting the dots, it is about enabling appropriate finance and you know, efficient and realistic loans, financing schemes, independent of the region you're from. And then it's also about capacity building and sharing technology and applying what works. And how does, you know, how do we develop new technologies? How do we scale? To me, again, we have very good examples, right? If you look at some of the biggest corporations in the world, they know how to scale products. They know how to create the demand for their products. When it comes to technology, it is about iteration. It is about testing. It is about repetition. So we have to find, you know, highly efficient and optimal processes. We have to iterate, perfect them, and then scale them through the means that private sector already has, you know. I mean, if we're talking about creating demand, people want to buy an iPhone, right? If that iPhone is created through a circular economy, people will still want to buy it, even if the price is plus or minus $100, $200. Personally, that's my feeling. At the end of the day, some of the, you know, key issues, depending on the region, again, informality is a big one, and I feel like there is a lot of potential for developing smart solutions there when it comes to, you know, waste picking, importing. On the one hand, countries importing waste and dealing with a lot of waste from other countries, and on the other hand, exporting resources to countries that then do something with it and bring it back. There, like, this is a, you know, this is a huge opportunity for circular economy, I feel like. We have the new plastics treaty that's coming up, that's being developed in the next couple of years. I think that will be a very interesting example where we will see how countries would like to deal with this and how we can set up, you know, a global framework for dealing with a particular material like plastics, which is a huge one. There are others from the private sector and from other organizations who are working on other material flows. Again, you know, if we focus on the 80-20 principle, if we look at 7 or 8 materials like plastics, cement, steel, etc., we cover a huge part already. So if we can establish, you know, proper material flows and circularity in some of those key materials, we can get far ahead. And at the end of the day, I think, you know, we're on the right path already, but putting into context with some of the remarks we've heard and you know, stronger growth that we've been experiencing and development and rise in living standards and consumption, we definitely have a lot on our plate. But I think the elements are all there. We just need to intensify our efforts and work together.
Thank you. Yeah, we actually did want to open it up for questions. Were you about to put your hand up for a question? Amazing. So yeah, do if there are some questions, do think about them. Maybe we'll start with you. Is there a mic that we can, or is it this mic? We'll find a mic, and I'll ask one other question to the panel in the meantime. What's been touched on, I think, between all of you is an importance of thinking about the local, because you've all mentioned the local cultures, the local traditions, the local sectors that are really important. I know Indonesia, and I'm going to get the right country this time, as G20 presidencies this year, Italy the year before, Saudi Arabia the year before that. It is part of the G20 working group. There is a Resource Efficiency Alliance and Resource Efficiency Dialogue in both the G7 and G20, so that importance of international collaboration exists. And then you mentioned in Africa, we have the World Circular Economy Forum coming up, so there's also regional groupings to look at it as well. And perhaps the African Circular Economy Alliance, it's taking a particular look at Africa in order to exchange knowledge between African countries on circular economy?
Yeah, thank you very much. As you are saying, and other panelists have said, collaboration is a must. Even the issue of finance I talked about, we are talking with African Circular Economy Forum and Alliance, and the African Circular Economy Network to address some of the issues I raised: finance, laws, and policies. And for Rwanda, on Monday this week, we launched a branded financial facility between government, and the private sector to make sure that we have a green investment facility that will enable the private sector to engage more meaningfully in sustainability projects, in sustainability through specific financial mechanism. So for the first time, as you are saying, Africa is welcoming World Circular Economy next month, maybe next 3 weeks. So this will be the first time Africa is hosting the World Circular Economy, and it will be in Rwanda. And as the founding member of the African Circular Economy Alliance, we will host it, we will share our experience, and the forum will take place over 3 days in a hybrid form, physically and online. But I encourage people to come physically. So the first 2 days will be dedicated to the main sessions of the programs, and the third day will be for side events and accelerator session. So the World Circular Economic Forum is co-organized by the African Circular Economy Alliance, the government of Rwanda, the Africa Circular Economy Network, and the Finnish Innovation Fund. So I think we have also international partners, and the forum will present some of the world-based circular economy solutions. And we will examine businesses from Africa, from Saudi Arabia, and we are eager to learn from others. And I'm sure they will learn from Rwanda. This is an opportunity for all of us to collaborate. And I take this opportunity to invite everyone to Kigali to join us for the World Circular Economy Forum, and to join us physically, so that you will not only attend the World Circular Economy Forum, but you will have to explore opportunity, investment opportunity, tourism opportunity, and we will be together for a better world. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And I think I think what we're hearing on the panel is a lot of enthusiasm, particularly in terms of where the future of work and skills and employment and interest will go. Examples, although between us, I think we all know and admit they are still small scale. They are not yet mainstream. So just to re-emphasize that, like on the balance of this panel, it is both positive, but also we are at the beginning of a transition, and there is an awful lot more to do. Do you have a microphone at the back now? Yeah? The lady at the back who wanted to ask a question. Yeah, so there is an awful lot more to do. So also, the point about collaboration and so on, if we, at the end of this panel, if you can grab people and exchange on ideas and practices, do that, because we will need it. Yes, please.
Thank you so much for your contributions. I have learned a lot, and thank you for your important work around the world. My name is Vernita Ford. I'm an ecologist, I'm an economist, and I would love to know your views on how you compare the circular economy to the concepts of degrowth or of steady state economies. And I think this conversation is important. I think your engagement in that conversation would really help. So I look forward to hearing your thoughts on this. Thank you so much.
Okay, you didn't hear it? So the question was, how do you relate the concept of circular economy to questions of growth? Do you relate it to degrowth? Do you relate it to steady state growth? Or do you see it as part of growth, but a different basis from not doing it off a linear economy, but doing it off a circular economy? And I'm also going to keep you all really short this time. So please no more than 1 minute on your answers. Please go ahead.
Okay, so again, invitation to cut me off. I thank you for that question. I think it's very important part of this overarching narrative. one thing that I keep on going to in a lot of these policy interventions is the psychology of humans and what they do accept and what they do take in. We had a very intensive conversation with a couple of economists that were really highlighting the importance of the role of degrowth, and I don't want to call anyone out, but all of them have gone to a conference in the EU and chose to sit with one another unmasked, and all have gotten COVID. So I was moderating an empty stage in essence. And that just reminded us of the psychology of what we could do, right? So something as simple as wearing a mask is something that we would want to move away as far away from because of the trauma that has left within us of COVID, of all of the losses that have happened. So it's not so easy to push things that tell people, do with less growth. Choose a pathway that takes you, in a negative, growth opportunities for your children, minimize your ability to dream. I think the onus is upon us to redefine what that pathway looks like, and I don't think that it's impossible. The nice thing about it is, again, in a country like Saudi Arabia, that we're starting from a youthful generation, so what they know is the now. When you tell them from the now that your role is to repair the planet, and that's where you're going to find economic development, you're redefining what that pathway looks like, it's a completely different story. Those are people, for those who are underskilled, it's a symbiotic relationship as well, not the educated versus the uneducated, learning from the fishermen, learning from the people who are practitioners on the ground of how to recultivate our ecosystems, I think is something of a lot of value that we have not been properly monetizing or putting a dollar amount on. So it's not a question of degrowth, it's redefining what growth looks like and to whom that I think is the right pathway to look at it.
Thank you very much. Yes, you wanted to come in on this.
Yes, thank you, Miranda, and thank you for a very, very interesting question. And this is the questions that I'm really worried about when we're talking about with the economists. And in anticipating these questions in Indonesia case, before we decide that we are going forward with the circular economy, actually we conducted studies actually, and according to the studies that we have already developed, and we consulted this with the economists as well, and we can prove that circular economy in industry in Indonesia could generate additional GDP about 42 to 45 million US dollar in 2030. This could, we really expect that this could improve the understanding of the economy. So there is no questions about degrowth and steady state growth and so on. So in a more macro level as well, in the national context, we also could prove that this circular economy implementation is expected to create about 4.4 million net green jobs by 2030. This is study. But then we go through into taking more samples from the reality now. And basically we found out that we collect 36 samples from the companies, from the small, medium enterprise that have already implemented the circular economy. We found out that, well, many benefits here. This is proven that we could save about operational costs. It's about 43 billion rupiah. 430 billion rupiah, and we can create more jobs, about 14,000 jobs. And we could reduce emissions, we reduce the energy consumptions, we reduce water consumptions, and also we could also reduce the waste itself. So many, actually we conducted studies to prove that we can say that circular economy actually will not create a degrowth situation. In vice versa, in the contrary, it contribute a better growth in the future. So this will create a green economy in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. And yeah, Robert, you wanted to come in, and really, really important to hear the voice of employers in this. So what's your view on the economic opportunity here?
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thank you for the question. I think it's a pretty fundamental question and not an easy one to answer, definitely. Disclaimer, I'm not an economist. But, to us, for the IOE, we're engaged heavily in the UN system and in the current agenda. SDG 8, Goal 8 doesn't talk about degrowth, it talks about sustained and sustainable growth. One thing, and the other thing, going back to the opening remarks, decoupling is one, way of dealing with this. To me, the circular economy, I mean, there's definitely some sort of, not really degrowth, but similar elements, right, in reducing the rampant consumption and linearity, right? But at the end of the day, I think degrowth is also, in some ways linked to demographics and tough nut to crack in any case.
Yeah, thank you very much. In just short, circular economy and economic growth, they go together. They go together because, for example, if we all embrace the culture of buying what we need, not buying what we want, then we will save. We will have saving and we will be economically growing. So that's the shortest answer I can give. I thank you.
And just to add on, I think there is no reason why the circular economy and economic growth should be mutually exclusive. The question is, how do we leverage the opportunities of circular economy to the extent that we can have sustainable growth and that a model of sustainable growth that will ensure that future generations that come after us still have access to the kind of living standards that we do. I just want to add on to what the panelists have already shared, but the circular economy unlocks so much potential in green jobs, particularly for young people, especially for young entrepreneurs, young engineers, young scientists, many of them involved in the sectors of, for example, repair, remanufacturing, eco-design, innovation, R&D, and so on. At the same time, also, more efficient resource management is also a huge enabler of economic growth. And therefore, I think if we are able to leverage these opportunities, we are not looking necessarily at degrowth, but we are looking at a model of growth that will ensure that future generations continue to access those opportunities that they deserve to, but at the same time, for young people right now who can make the transition to the green jobs that exist in the sector and who can benefit from them. So my 1 minute answer.
Thank you so much. And that was a fantastic question. And we also only have time for one question, unfortunately. So thank you for going straight in there. I mean, I would, just to summarize a little bit of what we've heard, I think the economy part of circular economy is absolutely fundamental. It is a change in the way that the current economy is structured. There will be changes from all actors. So yes, slightly to the point about it's a redefinition, but also the fact that businesses and governments are both embracing this. That is also because it reduces supply chain shocks. We've seen recently, like the way in which resources and supply chains run currently, particularly in the pandemic, you saw how brittle they were. So the resource efficiency point that was made by Indonesia, rethinking also your partnerships locally and as well as globally. I think there's a huge element of resilience within the economic model that it builds up. So it's also partly why you see it reflected, for example, in the European Green Deal. It's an absolutely key part of that future projection, as other panelists have said as well in their economic plans. Thank you so much to all the panelists. It's been great to hear all the different perspectives. I hope it's been helpful. And to wrap us all up with a closing contribution, I want to invite Ms. Algayerova to the stage. She's the Executive Secretary of UNECE, which is the Economic Commission for Europe, who themselves work on circular economy in a whole manner of ways. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Good morning, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends of circular economy. And I'm happy to see such a big participation on this, for me, very close topic, because I will explain later. But first of all, I want to thank participants for a great discussion, for sharing your knowledge, to the organizers. And I was also happy to see that UN family, because we had opening by UNIDO, by my colleague, Director General of UNIDO. So UN is on board, NGO is on board, private sector on board, so it should be nice, but, you know, as we have heard, we need to accelerate, and we need to really take the action, and we have heard a lot about it. So let me speak then about what we are doing for circular economy at the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. First of all, our 56 member states, that is the whole Europe, East, West, the EU, up to Central Asia, North America, US, Canada, Turkey, Israel. So 56 member states agreed before April 2021, last year, that we will have our Commission session on circular economy. Because UNECE is working on environmental, energy, transport, housing, trade issues. So we had this discussion in April last year, what is good, and member states adopted their commitments to increase circularity in our region, what is encouraging, and I wanted to share with you. And let me just mention three, like, our action areas. The first would be forests, because they are by definition, forests are circular, right? And speaking about the forest, we definitely need to forget the old model, like take, make, use, and dispose, and we should start to speak about the circular, bio-based economy, sustainable and regenerative. This is the growth model. And what we need to do it at all stages of the value chain when needed. So it starts on, if we speak about the forest, on sustainable forest management, followed by use of the wood in every production stage, then concluding with the recovery of post-consumer wood at the end of the value chain. So it needs, ladies and gentlemen, systematic change of our mindsets, from policymakers to designers, engineers, consumers, and it's not stressed out enough, you know, that we need to be all on this boat. Secondly, we do a lot in our energy division. By the way, I have our director of our energy division, Dario, just you can wave the participants. And this division is working on sustainable resource management, okay? Because, why? Some numbers, let me introduce. Less than 10% of materials we consumed are recycled today. Between 1970 and 2017, extraction of minerals increased more than tripled, reaching 92 billion tons. So if that trend continues, the world will require 190 billion tons of materials annually by 2060. So this demonstrates everything. So this is why these trends needs circularity. And building circularity in mineral value chains during extraction, production, consumption can definitely help reduce pressures on extracting more resources. So, and this is why UNECE and Energy Division created two, much more, but I want to speak about two tools, and this is United Nations Framework Classification for Resources that are tools for sustainable management of anthropogenic resources, like secondary resources. And the second is United Nations Resource Management System. And this system has circularity at its core, and it supports member states, the governments, in taking advantage in several opportunities, increasing the circularity in resources use. So I just wanted to bring your attention. So such one small example is because I heard a speaker speaking about the importance of standards and norms and frameworks, and this is exactly bread and butter what we do. So if you go into this mindset that sometimes people don't understand us, what is it we are doing, but the soft power of standards, norms, and guidelines and frameworks, if you work on intergovernmental level, is very powerful. And if it is additionally harmonized across 56 member states and their policy. So it's one such example could be resource as service. This is one aspect included in our resource management that supports circular economy. So resource as service, it can create value added opportunities in avoiding losses, leakages, waste in the system, and exponentially increase the recycle and reuse. Try to think resource as a service. Okay, third one and last one is traceability as a fundamental enabler for circularity. Well, what do we do in several sectors? I will not go into detail, but this traceability is trust-building factor for all stakeholders, including the consumer. So if we can trace where the materials are coming from, also from the industrial perspective related to materials, in order to collect, reuse, recycle, upcycle, downcycle the waste. Okay, and also traceability information. And we are using blockchain solutions, information exchange standards, policy recommendations to trace better in particular industry sector. And of course, we speak here about SDG 12, responsible production and consumption. So plenty of challenges remain, and this is why we are all here in Sharm to achieve carbon neutrality in the industrial sector. So, as we know, it has a range of difficulties to replace that energy-intensive and carbon-emitting industrial processes. So, I just want to raise carbon reduction, capture, storage, reuse, removal with an industrial cluster approach. And we have heard it's creating sustainable jobs, provision of low-carbon stimulus for economy. So, I will stop here. Thank you for having and being part of this great discussion, and it was my honor to conclude this wonderful panel. Thank you.
Can you help?